Alrighty. Hello, everyone. My name is Justin Perry, and it is my honor to welcome you all. We're grateful to be joined here today by such accomplished experts in medical school admissions at their respective institutions. This event is hosted by the Ivy League Plus Pre-Health Society in collaboration with Dr. Deb Gutman, an esteemed academic and chief medical educator of CapYear, platform designed to help pre-health students connect with paid clinical experiences and apply to medical school during their gap years. I will be moderating the event along with our grad school coordinator, Keaton Andra.
Hi, during this event, we hope we can gain some valuable insight from our panelists who will share their perspectives on what it takes to stand out in the medical school application process. We will ask questions submitted in advance by students, and we will direct those questions to the select panelists so we can cover as much material as possible. The chat is disabled, but you as participants are able to submit questions in the Q&A, and if there's time, we'll try and answer those. Panelists, if you really want to speak to a question not addressed to you, please chime in before we move on. We'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Once again, we would like to thank our distinguished guests for their valuable time and insight, and we look forward to an informative discussion. That being said, let's get started. Panelists, please introduce yourselves and briefly explain your medical career path and the position you currently hold. And we'll start with Dr. Gutman.
Hi, so I'm Dr. Gutman. I'm an emergency physician working for Brigham and Women's, but I am a clinical assistant professor for the Brown Gateway's Masters in Medical Science program, and I am the chief medical educator for CapYear, a company that helps students find paid clinical experiences during their gap years. So I will pass it along. So we can pass it to Dr. Rodriquez.
Hi there, I'm Elliot Rodriquez. I'm a clinical associate professor at Upstate Medical University in the Department of Emergency Medicine. I've been practicing emergency medicine since, 1996. And I am a member of the Upstate College of Medicine Admissions Committee. I'm not an admissions officer per se, but I hope to speak from the perspective of the committee members.
Carrie, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Carrie Shotwell. I serve PCOM as Executive Director of Admissions. That's Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine. I think I'm the only osteopathic panelist here today. I am not a physician, but I serve the faculty committee on admissions as the lead. So my job is to make sure that the process is fair and unbiased and the faculty are well trained and facilitated. I've been on the committee for 18 years. So I come with that perspective. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm happy to go next.
Yes, please.
Already. My name is Paul White, and I am the Assistant Dean for Admissions at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. I am not a physician. I'm a lawyer by training, and I tell people I keep institutions out of trouble, but I've been doing medical school admissions for 23 years, most of them at Hopkins, but I actually started in undergraduate admissions 44 years ago, this June 1st. So I've been doing admissions a long time, and I oversee the MD admissions process. I'm also a voting member of the MD PhD committee, and happy to discuss that process as well. And I'm going to pass it on to my friend, Dr. Amiri.
Thank you so much, Dean White. Good evening, everyone. I'm Leila Amiri. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry and the associate dean for admissions at the Robert Larner College of Medicine at the University of Vermont. I'm not a clinician. While I am in the psychiatry department, I have a educational and a scholars pathway within the department because of my particular research interest in cognition and learning. To give you a little bit of my background, I've worked at 5 different medical schools, both public and private, large and medium-sized and smaller, and really excited to be here. And Dr. Peña, I will hand it to you.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Jessica Peña. I'm a cardiologist. My clinical practice is focused in preventive cardiology. I'm associate professor here at Weil Cornell, and I'm also assistant dean for admissions, a role I've been in for about 3 years, though I've been involved with admissions as a faculty member for many years and also as a student member of the admissions committee when I was a medical student at Weil Cornell.
Awesome. Has everyone introduced themselves? All right, super. So we will go ahead and move into some of our student submitted questions. This question is for all panelists. What is one thing that you think distinguishes your med school program or curriculum the most? And what should make someone put your school on their list when they're considering going to med school? I guess we can start off with Dr. Amiri.
Sure. Thank you, Justin. So this is always a really difficult question to answer. And I generally, when students ask me this question, I turn it back on them and tell them, let me know what's important for you. And I'll let you know if I have that or not, because I think all of the medical schools have, similarities and whether or not we think that's the most unique thing. So I'll take a couple of things. I'd like to highlight our curriculum, which is completely based on active learning and social learning. And so that's really designed to encourage students to become critical thinkers and engaged within the learning process. And it's based on adult learning theory model. We have a professionalism statement, which I know we always invite and encourage applicants to think about the culture of the institution. And it's really hard to determine what the culture is based on what we see online. And so the professionalism statement that we have in the professionalism mission helps, I feel, applicants get a sense of what they can expect when they join us and what our expectations are of them in terms of their behavior and conduct. And finally, social justice driven medicine is at the core of what we do as an institution. And I think most people are familiar with the state of Vermont. And so in terms of the social justice calls that come from within the state. And so that's really folded into all parts of our curriculum. And I can stop there.
I can jump in. I don't know if you want to call on people or if we just throw it in there, but I think one of the things that makes PCOM unique is that we have a kind of structure around the interprofessional education. So PCOM is an osteopathic medical school, but we also have a school of pharmacy. We have a school of psychology. We have a school of health sciences. So our students in our pharmacy program, our psychology programs, our biomedical sciences programs work with our DO students in interprofessional education learning modules. So students are able to learn about how does a pharmacist learn about medicine and what is their role in the healthcare system. And they learn that early on because these are the people that you as a physician will be leading in the healthcare space. And you need the information that they have in order to make well-informed, good decisions. So we have students working with other professionals early on in the educational setting.
Great. If we could hear from you as well, Dean White.
Well, like my colleague at Larner College of Medicine, it's hard to say one thing, but I think part of what makes us unique is our curriculum, which looks at the social determinants of disease. And for our students, we revamped our curriculum several years ago and always modify it as we learn more about the curriculum, and that seems to really benefit our students. Among the changes we instituted, we're creating these learning communities, we call them colleges. So our students are assigned to 4 colleges, regardless of their intended specialty. Our total class size is 120, so there are 30 students in each college, and they are served by faculty members who are physicians who act as mentors to them and give them early exposure to patients, learning about health disparities and health inequities right after orientation as part of the curriculum. And then we have a longitudinal ambulatory clerkship, which takes them into the community later in the year so that they are getting exposure to patients up close. All of our students have an opportunity to apply for research grants between their first and second year. And many of those students turn those research programs into their scholarly concentrations, which are mandatory in order to graduate, but it doesn't have to be research-based. Most students have written children's books as long as it relates to patient care. There's a lot of mentoring done at Hopkins, and so many of our students coming with the interest in both clinical practice but also academic medicine. And, about 43% of our graduates will go into academic medicine after they graduate, so we're really pleased with that. 100% of those students will have had research by the time they graduate. 99% have a publication. So we think we're preparing people to be leaders in academic medicine, but also in patient care. And I think the curriculum pours that out as well. And I'll pass it on to Dr. Rodriquez.
So a couple of unique things about Upstate Medical University. We have a clinical campus, a secondary clinical campus down in Binghamton. So Syracuse is a medium-sized city, but certainly not New York, Baltimore, Philadelphia size. So we offer a nice mix of urban as well as rural. We have a rural medicine pathway for those students who are interested in serving rural communities in the future. One of the things that we are going to be rolling out soon, and for those students who are still a couple of years away from their application, we are initiating a new 3-year curriculum at Upstate starting next year.
Great, thank you. And if we could hear from you, Dr. Peña.
Yeah, sure, Peña. So I'll give some highlights of what I think are really the best parts of the experience as a student here. One, I guess I'll expand. Everyone talked about their curriculum, and I'll say that I think there's an ability to personalize your education in a way that I think is important. You know, we realize that people will pursue different paths, whether in academic medicine or leaders in, you know, in other areas, and people will blend different fields. And with the area of concentration, you're able to really dive deep into something that interests you, and it's really designed around you. I think so much of this process in deciding where to apply is, you know, your own like personal mission and values. The other is a strong commitment to global health. I think that's something that's been a long part of the culture here, and something that's really supported by us, and there's a lot of mentorship for. And then last, I think, despite being in a big city, it is a very, it does feel like a small community, and I think that's because our students are very much involved, even outside the classroom, in a lot of service learning activities together that they lead, you know, and serve communities here in New York. I think that that's, you know, a large part of the culture is that service learning. So.
All right, moving on to some recent admissions developments. Keaton, I believe you have a couple of questions.
Sure, we would like to hear, does your school use CASPer or PREview, and why and how does it factor that into its admissions decision? And we'll hear from Dr. Shotwell and then Dr. Amiri.
I just got promoted. I'm actually not a doctor. I have a master's degree, but I'll take it. So what the question was about CASPer. So we actually don't use an SJT currently. There are some schools, many osteopathic schools in particular, that are collecting the information for research purposes, but are not utilizing it in the admissions decision. Right now, we're doing neither. We're kind of waiting to see, because the SJT that just came out from AAMC is something that we're interested in. We also have looked into the CASPer program, but neither are required at this point in time. But I do believe that in the future it will be something that we utilize. What our hesitation was about the cost to the student. You know, we're looking for not adding any barriers to the application process. It's already very expensive to go about the application process, to prepare for the MCATs, take the MCATs. We were looking to not provide another barrier for students when the information is not yet fully vetted. But in the future, should that information determine that it is good way of evaluating the other factors that we pay attention to in admissions, then we would be utilizing it perhaps. We utilize a holistic admissions process and have been. Osteopathic medicine is founded in holistic treatment, and we've been doing holistic admissions since 1899 when we started. So we feel like we have a really good way of evaluating the factors that are non-cognitive, right? The things that you come to the table with as a full human, your level of resilience, your grit, your tenacity, your ability to kind of stick to it when things get really hard. That's something that we evaluate in the interview process anyway. So right now that is not something we'll be looking at.
So we do require CASPer at my current institution. We do not require the preview. However, we do get the preview scores from the AAMC for individuals who have provided them. The CASPer doesn't have a threshold for us. So for example, there isn't a threshold where an applicant must meet, and below that they're not considered. It's additional information that we use, and it helps contextualize a little bit more. So let's say an individual comes in and their application's reviewed holistically and they're very strong. They come in our interview process and maybe have a little bit of a bumpy day on their interview. A high CASPer score suggests that they're strong in those 10 attributes that the CASPer is measuring. And so we will look at the interview score in the context of a strong CASPer performance that they've provided to us. But in terms of a, for it being a threshold and it's not accepting people below a score or having a higher score is great in of itself. It doesn't stand alone in our application process yet.
Great, thank you for your responses. Our next question has to do with the new activities section that's going to be included this year, which is social justice. And we want to see how you would suggest applicants use this new category. And we'll pass that over to Dean White.
I haven't made a decision yet, so I can't really say.
All right, thank you. We'll move over to Dean Peña.
Yes, I don't think I'm prepared for that question either. I would say, though, in general, all these parts of your application are really places for you to highlight what's important to you and design really around it for you to express yourself. And so, especially if it's a new question, I don't think there's a template for an answer.
Great, thank you. What type of content do you think is important for the other impactful experiences statement? And does it have to be something negative? And I'll give that to Dean Amiri again, and then Dr. Rodriquez.
So the other impactful experiences, I believe, is replacing the disadvantage statement section in the AMCAS application. So and that was one of the reasons why it was switched, right? Because I feel that there were applicants who we would have, as the admissions committee, would have listed their lived experiences as something that could be considered a disadvantage, that contextualizes their application and helps us understand maybe academic performance, or let's say a lower number of volunteer or shadowing hours, and applicants weren't putting that in there. So it doesn't necessarily have to be negative as far as I'm concerned at my institution. It can be anything that helps us understand the perspectives that the applicant brings to the table, and also the circumstances by which they've engaged with their learning and other experiences that they've been able to share on their application.
Yeah, I would say that use it as an opportunity to distinguish yourself in terms of your life experiences that make you unique and help you give some context and depth to the rest of your application. I don't think it has to be negative.
I think anything that you include in the application that gives context is really important, in terms of kind of providing a whole picture of who you are as a whole human coming to this process. But the other thing that sometimes people miss is, what did you learn about yourself through that process? It's one thing to have experienced some life, right? Life's coming at you pretty quickly. But then kind of having that extra few moments to reflect on it and to determine, well, what do I know about myself from here forward? What will I do in the future if something like this happens? That extra piece of being a little bit more insightful about what the future will look like based on what you've experienced is something that you want to take advantage of.
Great. Thank you all for your responses.
Excuse me,
Dean White, yes,
I have
yes,
my
go
hand
ahead.
up. Yeah,
Yes, go ahead, Dean White.
Thank you, Justin. No, I wanted to just point out that while that statement may be new on the AMCAS application, many of us, not all necessarily, but many of us asked similar type of questions already on our secondary application. We've had a question for years. Is there anything in your application that hasn't already been addressed that you feel will give the admissions committee a better understanding of who you are? And it can be negative, certainly, but it can also be a very positive experience. I think AMCAS is coming a little late to the game in that regard, and I don't want to see a duplication of our question, which was written with a lot of thought, and I am a little concerned about that new question. I'll be perfectly honest with you, because I feel some people will say, "Well, I answered this," on my primary application, the AMCAS application. So I'll see how this year goes, but I can also imagine either having to change our question, which I'd rather not do, or eliminating it, which I definitely don't want to do, because it's been really helpful to the committee to understand that there are things that aren't always addressed in the primary that can be addressed in the secondary that will help our understanding of the applicant. So, thank you.
Great, thank you. Our next question has to do with some of these lawsuits that we've been seeing recently in the news concerning affirmative action. And we'd like to hear if you think that'll affect this cycle or the next so, and if so, how will it affect it? And we'll bounce that back to you, Dean White.
Well, as the only lawyer on this panel, I can honestly say we're not sure. I just hosted a panel on Friday, and I'm not sure, Jessica, if you signed in and listened to it, but it was a panel with our general counsel's office. Whatever you do, make sure your general counsel's office, or the other medical schools, is aware of it and has some input. But I think we have to be prepared for making some adjustments. And it's also quite possible that the court will say this will go into effect in the 2025 cycle, because tomorrow starts the 2024 cycle, so it may be a little too late, because we would have to change our secondary application. I've been told AMCAS is not going to change the primary AMCAS application for this cycle now. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. So, but I think we have to certainly be prepared going forward. One of the things you can do now is to look at your school's application and make sure it is race neutral, should that be an issue. And you can also look at your process and make sure your selection process, and are there any things that might benefit some people versus others. But our commitment isn't going to change, I can tell you that.
And I can just pipe in again as a non-lawyer and non-admission side, but in terms of that, just makes that other impactful experiences section all that more important, because some of it is about distance traveled, and if you can sort of represent that on your application, that may help people on the admission side understand your journey.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because even if we don't ask about race, and we don't on our secondary, by the way, if you won't find it on our secondary, students can still answer the questions like the one Dr. Gutman just referred to, and certainly on our secondary application. But we also have a couple questions in the secondary that are open-ended, and that's what you can do. We're not telling you to say why as a person of color, but we do want, if that's incredibly important to you, to talk about it. There's no, as long as we don't initiate that, you can describe anything you want, write about anything you want.
Great, thank you. We love to hear a lawyer's perspective on the issue. And then we'll switch over to Justin, who's got a few questions on the applications.
Sure. So in your view, what makes an applicant stand out? What traits, activities, or themes in an application have made you go, wow, we really need this student? And can you think of an example of an applicant that stood out to you and why? I'll pass this over to Dr. Peña.
There's no one applicant. That's the thing. I think, we're trying to bring together a class of people who will learn from each other, who probably would not otherwise know each other. And I think the most memorable people I've met are people who are really passionate about something, whatever it is. It's not a thing. It's more their own enthusiasm that they can portray, and commitment to something. And I think when you're able to do that and show that, that's infectious with whoever it is that's reading about you or meeting you. So there's no one template, there's no one kind of person. It's really you being you and what's important to you, in my opinion.
And again, from the pre-health advising standpoint, I would say for me, it's always maturity, right? So it's not any one type of person. It's just that ability to reflect in a mature way on their career choice and what they've done to get there.
Yeah, if I might add, much like my colleagues just indicated, everybody's different. Everybody kind of comes with their own story. One of the things that stands out for us, though, is hands-on patient care. Honestly, when a candidate has spent their hard-earned money and time working with those who can't care for themselves, working in a CNA role, for example, patient care tech, you're getting to see people at their most awful moments, the scariest, the angriest. And those are, I think, important moments to have in understanding why the heck you want to do this work. You can't learn about those terrible things that happen in healthcare and those really awful moments when you're in rotations or when you're out, in residency. It needs to be something that you've already experienced. And the more hands-on that it is, the more that you've actually put your hands on people and helped them get through those moments, the higher your level of empathy is going to be, and the more solid your why is going to be. And the why, honestly, is what it's going to keep you going when it gets really difficult, when it gets really challenging, and when it gets really tiring, and when you've had enough. And that happens pretty quickly, from what I understand. So that the strength of your why is really kind of solidified by having those really deep patient contact experiences.
Yeah, I agree with my colleagues, and I want to add something that I look for in both the application and the interview. And I've done hundreds, probably thousands of interviews in the last few years. And the thing that really stands out with me, and I just mentioned this to one of our accepts, it's probably been accepted to several of the schools on today, the applicant's humility. There are applicants, Dr. Gutman mentioned distance travel. There are applicants who have been homeless, who have been victimized by their family, by their parents, so forth. And they don't let that hold them back. They focus on achieving something and still helping others. And I've interviewed students who talk about having privilege because they were able to get an education, even though they had to overcome all kinds of odds to get that education. And it's their humility that stands out. I can think of a handful of people just in the past 2 years that I had chills in talking to when I interviewed them. And those, I'm not saying go out and get that, but when I see it, that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking, my God, we have to have this person in there. Or if they don't come here, as long as it goes somewhere, that's the important thing to me. I want them to be a doctor. I want them to be a doctor and realize their goals.
So our next question, what are some common mistakes that you see students making in their essays and applications? And how do you recommend that students kind of avoid some of these pitfalls? I'll pass that to Dean Amiri.
Thank you, Justin. I think for me, the biggest, if I can call it a mistake, is applicants assuming that we understand what their purpose is of sharing many stories. So oftentimes I will read a personal statement and my concluding comment is, the applicant is lost in the story. So I'll get 4 to 5 little stories. And I think the goal is for me to understand how empathetic this individual is, or they're trying to show their cultural humility, but there isn't a summative statement about, what they want our takeaway to be from the personal statement. So I think that's a place where an applicant has lost an opportunity to share with us, why this profession. The other mistake that I frequently see is a reiteration and restating of the experiences. And so there's a beginning paragraph that's very dramatic. There's often, lights and sirens and people having strokes or things breaking, and then that ends. And then they begin with, I started as a freshman at this university, and they walk us through their journey as an undergraduate. And then at the end, so you see, this is why I'm the perfect person for medicine. And so it's a letdown after the sirens, because I want to know what happens afterwards, right? And then I don't get that. And then all of the high level overview of their experiences and activities is really a waste of that space, because I'm already seeing that in the experiences section. And so I'll be very transparent when I see that, then it becomes a skim for me, and it's no longer a deep read into what that personal statement is about, because I have already read it. And I generally use the personal statement. I read the personal statement first or second, but generally the experiences support what's stated in the personal statement. And so that's valuable space. It's 5,300 characters that I think an individual should use. And the third thing that I would say that I would caution applicants from doing is using analogies that don't make sense with the experiences that they're going to share with us. So if they talk about this being a marathon, or this being climbing a very high mountain or something like that, and then it's not woven into the rest of it, you can't assume that the committee members will understand what that means. So if I haven't run a marathon, I know that it's hard, but I may get the wrong impression, because running a marathon is physical and some mental, and applying to med school is so much more than the mental and the physical, and so there's passion and other things that go into it, and so not helping. So the analogy falls flat for a committee or committee members or screeners, wherever that personal statement is read in the process. And so, all the hard work that goes into writing this most difficult part of the application is lost. So those are my top 3.
And Dr. Rodriguez, do you have any comment on how to avoid common mistakes and pitfalls?
I think one of the most important opportunities the personal statement gives the applicant is not necessarily to make it personal in as much as it has to be some very deep, tragic thing, but to allow the committee or the officers making decisions on admissions to get to know you as a person. So focus on the person, not necessarily the personal. Obviously, they go hand in hand. And one of the biggest opportunities, I think, that helps you as the applicant is giving us good insight as to why you've chosen what really is going to be a long and arduous path. So, don't try not to skimp on the personal motivations for choosing such a journey, because that's really important.
All right. What is the most important thing that you would consider, or you advise students to consider when obtaining letters of recommendation? Should they get a letter from their most meaningful activity that they put on their application, someone who's involved with that? What should a student do if they can't get a strong letter from a science professor due to virtual classes or large class sizes? I know a lot of students seek letters from science professors, and some schools have a requirement that they do so. I will pass that to Dean White.
Well, I think first of all, you have to read what are the medical school's requirements for the letters. We ask for a committee letter if your institution has a committee. Mr. Andra, I believe, is at Brown. Brown has a committee letter structure. we absolutely have to have it or you're incomplete. If your school doesn't have a committee letter, we require 2 science letters from faculty who taught you in a course. So that doesn't mean a PI. It has to be someone who's taught you in a course, and 1 non-science letter, and take that to mean someone in the humanities, social, and/or behavioral sciences. And I would prefer they stick to 3 letters. If they send in more than 3 letters, I'm not going to guarantee that I'll read more than 3 letters, because we have thousands of applications, and that's a lot of reading. As long as I'm wearing glasses now, probably, that's after years of doing it. But there's always an opportunity to update your application for us after you've been invited to interview or after the interview. But I really prefer either the committee letter if the school has one, and in lieu of that, 2 letters from science faculty. I want to know how you're going to do it in the pre-clinical years and have them address your intellectual abilities as well as your ability to contribute to discussions and so forth. And the same is true in the non-science letters. Don't want to hear from a doctor unless that doctor is taught you.
I would place a strong emphasis on someone who knows you or people who know you well, who can write a personal letter, because as you mentioned, there are some classes where there just isn't that opportunity. So rounding that out with people who know you well, who've worked with you, who can maybe speak to some other places, some weaknesses on your application, or explain some things that may not be clear. I think those are the most valuable.
I'm just going to tag on to that from a question from the Q&A from Ms. Shotwell about whether PCOM requires a DO letter.
Just saw that. Yeah, so we do not require a letter from a DO specifically. There are colleges of osteopathic medicine that do. So if you are looking, broadly at osteopathic schools, you might want to, seek someone out. But we don't penalize students who haven't had direct access or who just weren't able to secure a letter from someone they did have access to. Letters of recommendation take a lot of time, and you're asking a lot of someone to do that. So we kind of honor that space. What we're looking for in the application is, have you done your homework, right? Have you had experiences, whether they be in a clinical space where you're shadowing or working alongside a DO, or, maybe you're just going to some of the events that ACOM sponsors. We had an awesome event in Baltimore on, is that Saturday? What day is it? I feel like the days are running together. But we had an awesome event where there were students that, provided an OMM demo. There were 2 PCOM students from our OMM lab that did that. And they had a panel for people to learn more about what osteopathic medicine is about, and, why they would maybe want to consider that as an option. So sometimes it's more about what homework you've done to investigate the school and or the profession, broadly that you're looking to go into. So, a lot of people stress over that, and I always tell them, obviously make sure, as my colleague said, to ensure that you're meeting the criteria for that particular institution, but you seeking out and finding, opportunity to learn more about those individuals is really what we're looking for you to have done, is to just do that homework.
Great. Thank you all for your responses. We want to talk about another important part of the application, which is your clinical experiences. What type of clinical experiences do you want to see, and how do you know if you've had enough clinical experience? And we'll start again with you, Dean Shotwell.
Sure. So at PCOM, we don't have a minimum number of hours that we're looking for a candidate to have, completed any kind of clinical work, whether it be shadowing or actual work in a clinical setting. It ranges. We've had people who had, 65 hours, had people with 6,500 hours. It really does, there's a big range. And what we're looking for is really what kinds of patient populations you've been exposed to. So maybe you only spent a few hours at a particular location, but if you were in a space where you were seeing some really heavy stuff and you had some opportunity to have good conversations with clinicians about those things that you've seen, that for us is meaningful. So how you describe in your sections, you're putting in, how many hours, where, what your title was in the application, but that little space where you can write that little, description, that's where you need need to get creative about what you learned about yourself, who you saw, what kind of insight it gave you to your own interest in medicine. I've seen some really creative ways that people have talked about what they learned in those spaces. And so, you know, that's almost like a little mini essay for every single experience that you've had. So take advantage of that.
Thank you. Could we also hear from you, Dr. Amiri, about clinical experiences and what you expect?
So similar to what you heard from our colleague, Ms. Shotwell, we don't have a minimum requirement for clinical experiences. For us, any opportunity that an applicant has to be in an environment where care is being provided, that can count towards clinical experience. And so that might be in places where, you know, applicants don't think that this is clinical. And I'll give you an example. One might be volunteering at the local elementary school, helping with hearing and vision testing that is pretty routine at elementary schools in the United States. And so what we're looking for is really an in-depth understanding. Now, I would say that on average, an applicant should try to have something like 3 hours a week if possible during the course of their undergraduate career, and whatever that adds up to with other things that they have going on. When we review applications, because we know applicants have different degrees of pre-med advising help and support, we'll look for that in their application, even if they don't describe it as such. So oftentimes candidates will submit an application as a clinical research coordinator with 2,400 hours, and they'll have only 25 hours of clinical experience listed. But the 2,400 hours is really them spending time with patients, working with them, inviting them to, for example, participate in a study, following up with them. And so there's a lot of engagement with the patient within that setting. And so while they don't give themselves clinical experience for it, we will as we screen them in the application process. So I would say generally it's anything where any opportunity where a candidate has to be engaged in a setting where care is being provided.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Our next question goes to Dr. Gutman, followed by Dr. Rodriquez. How do you think taking a gap year before medical school can strengthen your application? And in what scenario would you recommend a gap year to a student?
I will let Dr. Peña take that first.
Well, we certainly have seen many of our incoming students have taken gap years. And I think especially I saw a question about not having been able to engage in some experiences during COVID, whether those are clinical experiences or just really getting to know yourself and having time for that reflection, and having the undergraduate experience that you wanted, where that having additional time can help. And I think that there's a lot of value in having those experiences. So again, I don't, it's not one size fits all. There are certainly people who, know going into their undergraduate years exactly what they're interested in and have had the time to engage in some of those activities, but not everyone does. So I think it can be a very valuable time. And there's also not, one gap year activity that's an ideal activity. We've seen people really do many different things, research, really other activities. So yes, I guess let Dr. Rodriquez chime in.
I'm gonna, oh, sorry.
Oh.
Yeah, I was going to chime in.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, that's okay. And then I'll let Dr. Rodriguez go forward too. But I would say in general, the reason to start thinking about whether you're going to take a gap year, I'd say the number one reason is if you can't quite answer the question about why you want to be a physician yet. Certainly a gap year will serve you in that capacity because you can certainly explore that further, either through clinical experiences or even research, or kind of really trying to sort out where your passion actually lies. I'd say the second reason to start thinking about should I take a gap year is if you have a passion you really want to pursue that might be time limited in medical school, right? So if you want to be strongly engaged in service in some sort of full-time capacity like Teach for America or Peace Corps, this is probably the time to think about whether you want to do that, or even potentially like a Fulbright or global health project. I mean, that is often like a very valuable experience that you can get before you start medical school. And then the last piece that sort of came up in the chat is if you did struggle academically as an undergrad and really need to think about, am I ready academically to engage in a very rigorous high-level science curriculum? That's something you really need to give a lot of reflection on and think about whether you need to, one, reflect on what the issue was academically, and two, then engage in either some sort of post-bac program to kind of reflect that rigor and be sure that you're ready before you apply and enter to medical school. And then there's certainly people who take a gap year just to improve their finances. So there's a large percent of people that have undergraduate debt that they want to start paying down, and just the cost of the application cycle alone is close to $3,000 to $5,000. So there's many people who might choose to take that time to get some of their finances and budgeting in order before they embark on the application or medical school. So I say those are probably the top reasons to start thinking about if you're going to choose to take a gap year. And just statistically speaking, it is the majority of students currently. So it is 77% of applicants that are taking gap years. So you would certainly not be alone.
Yeah, I agree with my two colleagues that have already talked a bit about it. I think, there's two reasons. There's the personal, either personal motivation, so you're not quite convinced in your path and you use it as a chance to solidify your commitment to wanting to be a physician. Could also be personal, as Dr. Gutman alluded to, maybe some financial reasons, or you just didn't have the resources at your undergraduate during your undergraduate experience to do some of the things that would help you stand out on an application. Maybe you need to do some more patient experiences. So maybe you want to take advantage of some research you didn't get an opportunity to do. It's really to kind of flesh yourself out as a person. And then, I would kind of separate out some of the academic reasons, which, maybe you need a post-bac to kind of help strengthen your GPA or something like that. But, I think all those things have value. You just kind of have to know yourself.
Great, thank you for your insight. And that sort of leads into our next question. From a number of students, we were asked, how do medical schools account for a low undergraduate GPA and a strong post-bac GPA or graduate school GPA? If we could hear from Dean White and then Dean Peña next.
Well, it's something that was discussed, I think, pretty early on by Ms. Shotwell, which is we review applications holistically. And if you have a lower undergraduate GPA, which may be a reason for taking a gap year, in fact, it is a reason for taking a gap year, that you want to work to improve that. And that can be either with a post-bac program, a formal or informal one, as far as I'm concerned. In many cases, if you were a science major, you're excluded from the career changer post-bac, but you may do a academic enhancement post-bac. And we'll look at all of that. I want to see what kind of courses you're struggling in, and that accounted for a lower GPA. And frankly, there are some students who the trajectory has shown improvement in the last couple of years. That's something that we look for. Maybe they only caught fire, so to speak. So that in those cases, they may want to take an additional year to show that that wasn't a one-time thing or whatever. So again, it's a holistic process, and it just doesn't just refer to your experiences, clinical and otherwise, but also your academic experience. And where you were in school at the time and what may have impacted you.
Yes, I agree with Dean White. We very much evaluate all applications holistically. So we look at trajectory. It's very common for people to stumble in the first few semesters. When I usually give these talks, I show my fall semester grades because I think people sometimes think that you have to be perfect. It's very common to struggle in the beginning. College for many people can be like going to another country, another culture, can be a very different experience. So So we really do look at, I think the question you're trying to answer to the person reading is that is this person ready to handle the rigors of medical school? And so whether it's with advanced coursework in a related subject, or explaining how you've grown, or what you learned about your whatever it is, study habits, or if you were overcommitted or whatever it is, I think you just want to answer those questions, for the people reading your application, so they don't sort of wonder on their own and make up something.
Yeah, and can I add one other comment to that? That's one reason why the letters of recommendation can be so helpful to us. If they tell us that we became intellectually aware and alive later on, that really resonates with our committee. And there are people that we will take who we feel have the potential that just hasn't been realized yet. We don't have a lot like that, I'll say that, but we do like to see it. And we want to give that student the chance to succeed. We have a great program here for students who learn differently, and individuals who can work with them. Our pass rate on the USMLE is among the highest in the nation, but we know that some of our students are learning differently now that they're in medical school than when they were undergraduates, and sometimes they need some assistance there. But you can't just go by the grades from the first year of college. Dr. Peña, if I showed you my transcript, you wouldn't believe I'm the one selecting people for admission. Just talk about my first year. Very different from my last couple of years, and certainly different from my legal transcript as well.
So
I'm laughing.
Sorry, guys. I just want to say, I think embedded in that question is a little bit of a subtext of is there an undergraduate GPA, which will get people screened out so that the graduate GPA will never get seen, I guess is sometimes the concern that I hear.
I just wanted to follow up on what Dean White was saying, in that those support mechanisms that exist for students who might have struggled as an undergraduate are going to vary from school to school. And so when you hear this comment, we're not suggesting that, a 2.65, but with a postbac of a 4.0 means that you're going to be competitive for every medical school, because that's contextualized with the holistic review process that particular school has. So be selective and be informed on how you move forward, because the support mechanisms vary from school to school as well. And I don't, for my program, there isn't an undergraduate GPA that will exclude a student as long as they've done some work afterwards. So we will basically ignore what happened as an undergraduate if the individual has solid postbac, or if there's a master's degree, because that's more relevant and it's the closest academic performance. And in conjunction with the MCAT and everything else that they provide, what happened 4 years ago as an undergraduate, we can ignore in our process.
One thing I would like to add, there are certain medical schools, speaking of Upstate, and I'm sure there's others that have pathways available for students that have concerns with their GPA or MCAT score, where they can do some academic work with the understanding that if they meet whatever thresholds are part of that program, that the medical school then will matriculate them. So that's something to look into.
Wonderful, thank you. We have time for maybe one more question, and if there's some time left, we'll have Justin pull some questions from the Q&A down below. So our question is going to be, typically there is an option in the application that asks if a student is a reapplicant to the school. What changes do you expect to see specifically if a student is a reapplicant? We'll start with you, Dr. Rodriquez, and then hear from Dean Amiri.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand. If a student is a reapplicant, what was the question?
Yeah, there's a place on the application that asks specifically if a student is a reapplicant for the school. And we're wondering what kind of changes you would like to see, what kind of material you'd like to see written in that section.
Well, I think if I were to see that, I would I would hope to see that the reapplying student has the insight to understand maybe where their weaknesses were and how they address those. I mean, there's so many varied reasons why they might be reapplying. It's hard to get more specific. Maybe one of the other panelists can jump in and share their insights.
So are you a reapplicant? So we get that information automatically from AMCAS, and for us, it's if the student is a reapplicant to our particular program. So a student may be a reapplicant, but if they didn't apply to me last year, then that will not show up as a yes for my program. Some schools will have that as part of their secondary, and that's just to let us know if the person didn't get accepted, for example, anywhere or not. And I agree with what Dr. Rodriquez mentioned. I mean, it's hard to say, there's so many different things, and the reasons that individuals aren't accepted vary. And sometimes it just may be that the class was filled and, you know, we didn't get enough movement on the wait list that we weren't able to accept a person. What I advise, and I know this is going to sound negative, but hear me out until the end, is that as soon as somebody hits submit on the AMCAS button, they should think that they're not going to be accepted that year. And if they're not accepted, what would they be doing? And so everyone's application, I feel, has room to be enhanced in some area. So apart from, you know, academics, that probably takes a longer period of time. If it's clinical experience or leadership or volunteering or anything that it is, the individual can work on that. And I think there was a question in the chat that how do we show that? If there's room on the secondary, the applicant should let us know that, you know, this is what has changed in my application. If there isn't room, and if the only shot that they have is in the primary, then somehow in the primary they can weave that over the course of the year. As I've reflected on this application cycle, and I look to be successful this round, what are the things that I've done? But that varies individually per person and per the institution. It's hard to give a straight answer.
If I can just, I agree with what both of you said, and I think for me, the biggest mistake reapplicants make for Hopkins, I'm not speaking for any other school, is that they want to reapply right away. And that doesn't always give them the opportunity to demonstrate how they have changed or improved. I would rather they wait a full year, frankly. I know it seems like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be 24 instead of 23 when I enter medical school. Who cares if you're practicing for 49 years versus 50, you know? So I think some people would benefit by addressing those holes, talking about that gap year, and getting the experiences that will strengthen their profile. Sometimes that's getting clinical experience. In fact, that is largely for us. I've really just getting clinical exposure. And sometimes it may be a combination. Dr. Peña may refer to clinical research coordinators. You know, that's a combination. Working on the intramural training program at the NIH is a great opportunity. You can do that for 6 months to 2 years. But do something to show improvement rather than have a knee-jerk reaction of, I'm going to reapply without really being able to demonstrate why you're a different candidate now than you were a year ago.
Yeah, I think Dr. Amiri's advice was really spot on, that you have, the key to that is that you have to start working on it right away. As soon as you submit the application, if there's a weakness that you know about, keep working on it or else you won't have the time.
Great. I think we're closing in on time here, so we would like to express our gratitude to our distinguished panelists for sharing their insights and expertise with us. We would also like to thank Dr. Gutman for her support in organizing this panel, along with the rest of the Ivy League Pre-Health Club.
And to our audience, we hope this event provided you with some valuable insights and guidance on the med school admissions process. We wish you the best in all of your future endeavors. And once again, thanks to our distinguished panelists and everyone in attendance for joining us today. We hope to see you all at our future events, and we wish you the very best of luck as you wrap up this academic year. All righty, thank you. Take care.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Like everyone.
Yes, good luck.
Good luck. Yeah.
All right, guys. Let me end the recording. Hold on.